Well, many thanks for joining us. Time now to focus on our interview of the day. And I just told you before, when we were starting this bulletin, about the issue of refugees. I mean, I just want to take you back to the year 2016, when former President Uhuru Kenyatta announced to the world that Kenya was in the process of closing all 8 refugee camps in the country because of issues around security and, of course, the issues around budget. We are now joined by the Commissioner for Refugees Affairs. This is John Burugo. He's going to help us understand where are we in terms of the closure of these refugees camps and, of course, the cost involved when it comes to running and managing the refugee camps that we have in the country. Thank you very much indeed, Burugo, for joining us. Thank you. Help us understand. I mean, you are telling me that we have about 804,000 refugee camps. Refugees in Kenya. Yes. Where are they and what are they doing?
Thank you to host me. The refugees in Kenya have been with us since independence. Initially, they were about 20,000.
20,000?
Yes, at independence. And that time, there were about 13 small camps. Utange, Njomvu, Thika, Garissa. Mm-hmm. A small number in Kakuma. And those ones had free movement. Because by then, mostly were Ugandans who had come in. Because then, the East African community, as you are aware. But in 1990s, there was a huge influx because of the collapse of Somalia. Subsequently, therefore, the numbers shot beyond 200,000. Mm-hmm. And the government decided to amalgamate, to merge the camps. And the camps became Kakuma and Daadab as we know them today. And that is when now all the 13 were collapsed to 2. And over the years, the government has been hosting refugees. We do practice what we call open door policy. We receive, document, protect, and also give access to government services. Mm-hmm. So Kenya has hosted refugees since independence. Only that the numbers keep increasing.
They keep growing.
And keep growing, yes. And we have now 804,594 registered refugees, mainly about 400,000 in Daadab, and the rest in Kakuma. We have about 106,000 spread across our urban areas, mainly Nairobi about 60%, Mombasa, Eldoret, Nakuru, and even Kiambu, Roiro, Kitengela, Isinya. So they are across our urban areas.
And when you talk about 804,000, refugees, I mean, that is like the entire population of Turkana County, Marsabit, and then you can also throw in Wajir there. Who is in charge of taking, who caters for the cost of keeping these refugees in Kenya?
Kenya is a member of group of nations and is a signatory to the UN Convention of 1951 mm-hmm. that provides for the protection, the hosting, and granting of rights to the refugees. And what has happened is that over time, government has been working with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. We have a country office, mm-hmm. and it works in collaboration with government and many other partners within the refugee space. So it is not only the Kenyan government. However, the government of Kenya carries a big chunk in terms of the responsibility of security, welcoming, documenting, protecting, as well as even giving access to services. Mm-hmm. We have been giving them access to education, health, water, sanitation, social protection, and we are now again moving. The humanitarian support globally has been dwindling because of the competing interests on humanitarian support. And therefore, the government of Kenya, just like other refugee hosting countries, is looking innovatively as to how we can sustainably be able to support the refugees, especially transform them or transit them from humanitarian dependence to development-oriented, where we create self-reliance and support them to empowerment. We have started socio-economic inclusion structures that would support them be able to access services, be able to also employ themselves or get employed. And we provide Permit M, which is the category for refugees to be able to work in Kenya. That is granted in collaboration with the Directorate of Immigration in the country. Mm-hmm. So I would say that the bigger chunk of the cost is on the government. And that is why from time to time, government has to assess what is the cost of the impact. Mainly, we have invested in security. Mm-hmm. We have also invested in the communities of Garissa as well as Turkana. They have donated that land, which the government designated by gazetting the two camps.
I want you to help us understand this. I mean, when you look at the growth of refugees in Kenya, about 20 years ago, there were less than 500,000 refugees in Kenya. Today, you're talking about 800,000. And you were saying that the huge chunk or the budget of ensuring that these refugees are hosted in Kenya, they are comfortable, they access health services, education as well, it lies with the government of Kenya. And this puts pressure on our budgetary plans because, let's face it, I mean, the country has been going through budgetary pressures or physical pressures. And so, for how long, you know, as a country, can we continue to say, just come in, we'll take care of you? And at the same time, you're also complaining about dwindling fiscal resources.
First and foremost, there are those conventions that Kenya, as a country, a member of Group of Nations, has assented to. And in the UN Convention of 1951 mm-hmm. and its protocols of 1969, it obligates countries to receive refugees. A refugee is that person who is displaced because of conflict, genocide, cleansing, or other persecutions, and expresses fear on their life and rights, and therefore they run away and they seek refuge in a neighboring country. Our 804,000 refugees come from East and Horn of Africa mm-hmm. and the Great Lakes region. And it is because of a protracted conflict and instability within the region that continues to push them this side into the country. I know that it's a huge burden. Of course, the country, first and foremost, is obligated to its citizenry to be able to provide in terms of budgetary, financial, and socio-economic items that would spur the productivity in the economy. But again, we must balance our national interest against the international obligation, mm-hmm. which we are signatory to.
And that's what I was coming to next, because, I mean, yes, the fact that the truth of the matter is that Kenya is a signatory to a number of refugee agreements, if I was to call them so. Part of it is being a member of the United Nations, yes. United Nations, yes. UNHCRC.
Yes.
But there comes a time when you have to say, hey, wait a minute. Though we are members of these agreement, this agreement is hurting our national interest. And so we can't take in more refugees because the numbers will keep on growing. And so are we looking at a situation whereby we're likely to get to that point?
Kenya is fifth in Africa in hosting refugees. Mm-hmm. I think Uganda is number one within the region. It has over 1.5.
Yeah.
And Kenya is also 13th globally. It is not that because we have an open door policy, we shall continue welcoming and registering and documenting and therefore undergoing the costs for hosting refugees. Mm-hmm. It is the national government interests, the national interests of the country the obligations that it has subjected itself to by assenting to UN Convention. It is for the country, the top leadership, to be able to decide now we cannot take any more because we are experiencing more pressure in terms of resources, in terms of security, or they pose a threat of some kind. If we get to that situation, then the country will have to take a decision. In 2016, when the country felt there was a threat to its national interest, the then administration decided, through a tripartite understanding, UNHCR, Somalia, and Kenya, to repatriate and close the camps. And IFO 2 and Kabios were closed. And a chunk of the refugees was taken back, was repatriated. But since then, the numbers have tripled. So we look at also...
The numbers of incoming.
Yes, of the influx has tripled. What we need to be able to look at is the sustainability, because migration is in the character of a human being. The displacements, however, are forced displacements. What does the country do? Which measures can it do? First and foremost, we have taken measures to integrate them, to make them productive, so that then the cost of maintaining them is mitigated.
Very good. I want you to hold your thoughts there. I'll be coming back to you so that you can help us understand what are some of the mitigation measures that you have put in place as a government. I mean, we are discussing the cost of running and hosting refugees in Kenya. We are talking about almost 805,000 refugees in Kenya. The number has more than tripled in the last 30 years. And so, if nothing is done, then we are likely to see another tripling in the next 20, 30 years. You're watching this conversation live from Broadcasting House. We're taking a short break. We'll be back with more. Stay right here. Welcome back. You're watching the Prime Edition. We're having a conversation around refugees, and we're in the company of Commissioner for Refugees Affairs. This is John Furugo. He's joining us so that he can help us understand what are we doing to manage the cost of hosting and, of course, maintaining refugees in the country. Before we got to the mitigation measures, I was asking you, what is the cost of hosting one refugee per day in Kenya?
I'll put it to a minimum of $3.
$3
a day.
That's about 450 shillings.
Yes. And that means that in a year you would have about 1,000. And when now that is basically to provide for the basics. But when you go to provision of education, of health, of water, sanitation, then the cost, of course, increases. But more importantly is that we need to recognize the investment the government has done in the area of security, because the security is core to hosting refugees.
And what you're trying to say, or what you're saying, is that the investment in security, in education, in health, it's actually much more bigger than the 162,000 shillings that we spend every year maintaining and hosting one refugee.
Yes, and as I mentioned before, we have partners who work with us. For example, in the area of health, we have a program that we are implementing together with partners that is supported by World Bank called Kenya Primary Early Learning Program, KPIL. And it is a $60 million 5-year grant, 6-year grant that is looking at provision of 117,000 scholarships for refugees and host community. That is under the window for host and refugees. And again, still on that program is the expansion of schools, classrooms, the accreditation of TSC trained teachers. Again, also the aspect of hot meals and also retention of girls. The bottom line is to improve unequal education outcomes within the refugee hosting areas. So we have many, about 6 programs that are running, supported by partners. So government is being supported in terms of a provision of services. But at the same time, I point out that there is what we are now as a government running from encampment to integrated settlements.
Integrated.
There are 2 municipalities, Kakuma and Daadab. And on top of that, we also are moving, shifting our policy from encampment to integrated settlements through Shirika Plan. Shirika Plan is a blueprint of socio-economic inclusion and integration of the refugees into the Kenyan government service delivery systems.
We'll be discussing the Refugees Act of 2021. And the privileges that it gives to refugees. But I still, before we depart from that point, I want to hear from you. I mean, you are talking about $3, for hosting one refugee in Kenya, and you're looking at 804,000 refugees in Kenya, and so it cost about 162,000 shillings, to maintain one refugee in Kenya. Out of 162,000, how much is met by Kenyan taxpayers?
I would say the much of it is met through health, where we provide free education, free health with the partners, education again, access to water. So those are the three areas I would say the Kenyan taxpayer is meeting. But the fourth one, which takes a bigger chunk, security. Security, yes.
Is also by the Kenyan taxpayers?
Of course.
So are you talking about maybe 100, maybe 60-50 ratio, or how would you divide it?
I would say 50%.
50%?
50%. But when you also look at the socio-economic impacts of hosting the numbers, the aspects of culture, the aspects of pressure on resources, the aspect of environmental destruction, so all that, it would go even to 70%.
70%?
Yes.
When we talk about the issue of refugees and migration, it's a crisis in the West.
True.
Europe is battling with a serious migration crisis. And according to UNHRC, the number of refugees has more than doubled actually, from 60 million in 2014 to around 120,000 120 million this year. Yes. That's a huge number. True. And from their projections, this number will continue to rise. And the question is, are we looking at a situation whereby we are likely to see, no, enough? We can't handle
for now, I would say the migration or refugee agenda in the country has not reached to be an electoral issue. It is already an electoral issue in terms of the West. But in Africa, we are yet to get there. However, I would say we are already experiencing the shocks and the impact, because we are looking at the socio-economic support to them, and how sustainable is that against the citizenry. And that is where now the government is striking. Well, there is a principle that the Global Compact for Refugees came up with that is called shared responsibility, the shared burden, where the country welcomes and hosts refugees. And the international community steps in to support that country through programs that are service-oriented to the refugees. But that sometimes is not coming through. And therefore, the government is left with the bigger burden. Let me put it this way, if you allow, that there are three durable solutions. A durable solution is one that will be able to give sustainability. And in this case, there is voluntary repatriation, where a refugee may feel conditions allowing at his or her country of origin to go back voluntarily, and they give themselves to that. Last year, we repatriated voluntarily 154 Burundians. But half of that number has come back with what we call returnees. Why? They went back and found their land is sold, and another dynamics which militated against...
was not conducive.
Yes, that were not conducive and militated against their reintegration into their country of origin.
And they came back.
So that is one durable solution, which is not working.
Number two
is the third country resettlement. That is where we get quotas to go to America, to go to Austria, to go to Canada and other countries. The quotas are very small, meaning that we have about 80,000 only who have benefited since 2013.
Since 2013.
Yes. So, and repatriation back to their country of origin, 62,000. Leaving over 700,000 as a burden stroke opportunity for the country. It depends on how the country manages the refugees, the localization aspect, which is a third durable solution.
Before I let you go, in the interest of time, I want to hear from you. The Refugee Act of 2021, I mean, the regulations, you know, they give some privileges to refugees, you know, from allowing them to get work permits, to having bank accounts, to owning a SIM card. I mean, those are some of the privileges provided for in the Refugees Act. Is it a panacea to the challenges that we face of refugees, the Act?
Indeed. Because if we are able to provide and be able to ensure that the KYC, know your customer, is recognized through central bank, the ID of the refugee is recognized, that will allow the organizations, financial institutions, to be able to allow refugees to open their account, get soft loans, run their businesses, KRA to issue PIN cards, and the telcos to also issue the SIM cards. So the most important for now, even as we transition through Shirika Plan, is the financial inclusion, ensuring that all refugees are able to access the financial ecosystem of the country by KYC. We must be able to include the refugee ID in the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism regulations that were last done in 2023.
2023.
Yes.
John Furugo, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We wish you all the best in managing and, of course, handling of refugees in Kenya as the Commissioner for Refugee Affairs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, John Furugo is the Commissioner for Refugees Affairs, joining us tonight to help us understand the cost of hosting, managing, and, of course, retaining refugees in Kenya. And if I've had the numbers, they are quite staggering. We have discussed that, among other plethora of issues. Sports news is coming up next with Daniel Wahome. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you for your time.